So why boundaries? What are boundaries? We're going to go over what boundaries are, why you need them, a little bit about the triangle trap with toxic behavior, and that's part one. So make sure you go back to part one, boundaries with toxic people or behavior. If you haven't watched that, because that's what that explains a lot more in depth of the triangle trap that I call it. It's my most favorite model. So make sure you understand that a little bit more, because I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Enmeshment, we're going to go over assertive behavior and repair, and then the take home. So the take home is going to be like, this is the problem. This is the problem with boundaries. So why we healthy and distractions are okay. But avoidances are not. And so, and then we be matched up to that. So the reaction of a relational trauma and shame, that's why we have boundaries, because we have relational trauma and shame. Okay. So a boundary around myself and only me, that's great, you know. And I'm sure that in therapy, you can learn a lot about your own boundaries, of what your boundary is for you and your soul. And so I have my own boundaries of like, this is what I need to do with my balance and my sleep and my, you know, with my time, energy, and money, because that's your values. And that's fine. That's only me, between me and me. Most of the time, the problem with boundaries is, of course, with another person. That's the biggest thing that we come into therapy with. I've had multiple people come in with relations, and it's usually family, you know, very, very, you know, tight knit people, domestic, and where you have conflict or you have disturbances with them. And it's like, how do I have a boundary around trauma from this person? Trauma, childhood trauma, you know, developmental trauma. And because it turns into shame and guilt and all that stuff when we put up the boundaries. So it's usually about two people. So, but the problem is two people, right? Instead of one. So we want to make sure that we understand boundaries and what we're doing it for and what the higher purpose is. So we're going to go through that. Okay. So living big. So big, boundaries, integrity, and generosity. Okay, so we're just going to start with boundaries. That's all we're going to worry about today. Brene Brown talks about this in several of her books, but Dare to Lead, Daring Greatly, Gifts of Imperfection, they're all there. But this one's her biggest thing that she has ever found in her research, and she's at 20 plus years now, that people that were shame resilient and balanced and you name it, they were the one with the biggest, strongest set, you know, consistent boundary. They were boundaried people, she called it. So I have a TED talk that explains this, and she just talks about boundaries mostly in it. And it's right here at the top of this next slide. So big and braving, my favorite, you know, so she talks about braving in her books, of course, and you can see these quotes all over the place. But boundaries. So number one, braving. We're just going to talk about big, which is boundaries, and braving. She starts with boundaries again. So B and B. So you respect my boundaries, and when you're not clear about what is okay and not okay, you ask. You're willing to say no. That's it. So that's all we're going to talk about is that first, those two B's. So just know that there's lots of research on this, and you can go into her stuff and her boundaries and watch that YouTube. If you've never watched her, she's hilarious. Yeah, it's great. And she's got lots of resources, and I have most of her books, you know, quoted in the back of this PowerPoint. So what are boundaries? They are guidelines. Their rules, their limits, their needs, their protection, There's so many things. They're firm, um, they're respected, they're safety, they preserve and deepen relationships. And I have this in the first boundaries part 1 too, of course, because we have to just know what they are. And here's the 6 categories. So that's just know that there's just 6 categories. Pick one of them that you struggle in and just improve it over the month with a person, with yourself, with, that one person that you struggle with that boundary with, and that you have a hard time putting up clear limits to empower your strength and your worth. So that's where you just say, okay, I need an emotional boundary around this person, around me. My emotional intelligence is important to me. So I'm going to make sure that that stays very balanced and maintained. And if this person gets to that depletion, then I need to put a boundary. And it's like, wait, people aren't supposed to influence us. Well, guess what? That is false. They influence us to the core. And that is actually part of crucial conversations. There's crucial conversations, there's crucial confrontations, and then there's influencer. And those are one of my 3, favorite books of, there's like 5 authors with those. So anyways, we'll talk about that later. But we are influenced. So when we're influenced, we sometimes have to put a boundary around how that is influenced. How that thing, how that person, how it affects us. There's no doubt. And a lot of times people come to therapy and say, I don't want that person to bother me to that point anymore. I don't want them to affect me anymore. And I'm like, yeah, that's not how this works. Our body stores emotion that sends us into a physiological response. And that's what happens. So when that happens, something's happening emotionally with us, then we need to put a boundary around that if we need to. So this is a little handout, the setting boundaries that goes along with the 6 categories of boundaries. This one is the other side of that handout. So you can, you can use this slide, or I have a lot of handouts on my own website of all of this and the PowerPoints. Most PowerPoints I've done. So if you want my website, you can chat me. So here's boundaries. Here's an example of what you could say. Here's personal space. So this is what we're going to go into. So this is way into the PowerPoint here. But this little personal space, we're going to do a little exercise real quick. So back to the other, category. So back to this category, say you have a problem with people violating your personal space. Back to the physical, personal space and physical touch, okay? So you just imagine this personal space. What does that look like, right? Well, with kids and everyone else, anybody, I just use a hula hoop. And I actually have a hula hoop in the other room, that I've kept here now at my home office. But a hula hoop is big enough that when you put it around your waist, it's pretty big. And it goes all the way down and all the way up. And if you pull it out, you've got more space. If you pull it in, the back of you has space. And so the point of personal space that you have to remember is that if someone is in your hula hoop that you didn't invite, the point is if you didn't invite them, so you say, hey, can I have a hug? And that person says, oh, yes. And you invite them in. This has got to be taught to kids because they have to learn to ask for personal space. And then you have to ask a person for personal space. And I think that's kind of, sometimes it's gone so far this way and so far that way. That's just a little thing about personal space. And if you're in my hula hoop, then someone can't come and steal your toy from them, punch them. I mean, they're not going to get close enough where they can touch them. And so that's what I teach kids. It's like, okay, what's the boundary? What's personal space? Well, when my brother comes in and, pounds on me, then he's inside your hula hoop. Is that okay? And I have kids in my office, like, draw, a little round thing around them, or it's like, look how much space a hula hoop gives you. So, hey, you're in my hula hoop, that's not okay. So a little example of that. So boundaries are not something that you have to people with other people. It's personal. The other person is really about you and your personal values. And it's not to fix or change or punish the receiver. It's not to punish you, but what's the number one thing that happens when we put up a boundary? We usually get blamed, shamed, punished, gaslit, manipulated, guilt trip. You get labeled like you're just being extreme. You have so many walls. And that's my favorite thing to correct people that say, oh, I just have so many walls around this person. And I'm like, it's not a wall, it's a boundary. You have boundaries. It's like, no, that's just boundaries. You're holding boundaries around your heart, your trust, because the patterns have shown that they violated that. So you've put up some boundaries. They're not walls. So that's how I, correct that. But to be ignored or unequal. So this little, I always see a lot of relationships unequal. So it's like, wait, that's not equal. That's not equal. That's not equal. Oh, okay. So you're doing this and they're doing that. That doesn't seem. When's the last time you lied or didn't tell someone where you were going as a teenager? So it's very unequal. They're not meant to be aggressive or passive at all, and they're not impersonal. They are very personal, and they're not against your value system. And that's where we have to go way back to your value system before we get to boundaries. And I just touch on that a tiny little bit here. But so the thing is you got to find a value list. You got to figure out what your values are and what you need first. But we'll talk about that. Okay, so ways to have boundaries. Assertive, of course, we're going to talk about. Know your value system, I just thought. Know your secondary emotion. If you want to learn more about your secondary emotions and what you feel, need, and willing to do statements, you can watch Emotional Intelligence Part 1 and 2. And that teaches you all about how to find your emotions, what secondary emotions, what you're feeling, how to express them, how to track them. You've got to know your secondary emotions. If it's a fear, there's only two emotions that come out of behavior. One's fear, one's love. So all these fear ones send us into the reasons why we don't have boundaries. The fear of reaction from the person, right? For example. So you have to be present. Fight, flight, or freeze doesn't work. I'll talk about that. You have to give yourself permission. That's a hard one in my perfectionist clients and world of like, here's perfectionism. We don't give ourselves permission. If you're in that kind of world, it's really hard to give yourself permission because if it's not perfect, if it's all or nothing, or if it's like, it either has to be this way or it's no way, right? And so it has to be perfect, and the other person has to respond and do this, or I won't do it at all. You have to know your self-care needs, what your balance is there. Know when your values have been crossed. So back to number 2, if you don't know your value system in how you want to be treated or what your higher purpose is at work, at your nutrition, your sleep, your balance, then you don't know when they've been crossed. Know your rights, don't apologize. There's a book in the back of this that's referenced. It's called Why We Don't Apologize by Harriet Lerner. It's one of my favorites. Of course, I have so many, but I have my top 5, 10 authors. But that's definitely up there. But she writes Dancing with Anger, and I think both of them are referenced. But yeah, number 10, rehearse and repeat. So we have to rehearse. Okay, so the best thing with rehearsing, that means writing it down, practicing it, having it in front of you when you need to make that crucial conversation phone call with a coworker, your boss, or your mom, or whoever it is, and then rehearse it and rehearse and rehearse it, and then repeat. and repeat and repeat. And that's where we get to the end of this workshop, is about the repeat part. Here's just a slide of from Cloud. I have him referenced in the back of this, of his 10 laws of boundaries. I just think it's interesting, just for information. These are the laws of boundaries that he has, and I just think they're necessary. For example, let's see, the law of envy. We will never get what we want if we focus on boundaries onto what others have. Okay. Envy doesn't work. Miserable, right? Dissatisfaction, powerless. We want to envy what someone else has. And if we put a boundary around that, trying to get that or focus on that, it just doesn't work. Okay, so this is the conflict triangle that I was talking about for workshop 1, for boundaries, for part 1. And I go into this a little more extensively. So this is just something that you can print this out. It's very, very helpful. It's straightforward. I absolutely love it. But if you notice right here, how to be a coach and challenger, number 1 is say boundaries, listen, exceptions, and provide choices. And it's the same over here, basically. To coach and challenge, that's what we want. We don't want to be in a parent-child relationship with our spouse. We don't need to be in a lose-win with our boss. We don't want to be, we don't want to be in a drama triangle, because I always cross out drama. He got that wrong, but that's okay. I always change models a little bit, but it's trauma when you're persecuting or rescuing someone. So this is what happens with a passive. We go into rescue. The aggressor is the persecutor. The passive is the rescuer. So here's put you down, and I'm going to point fingers helps. Suggestion, and they feel direction, or the person is not wanting their help, and that causes a lot of issues. Sorry, everyone can still hear me. And here's meshed, and then here's meshed. So here's, understanding enmeshment. It's like, oh, super unhealthy. Here's meshed. You're just in a very good connected relationship, but you're not, toxic. And then here's disconnect. And then this gets disconnected even more. So that's not healthy. So we want to just be in the middle right here. And so many people don't realize that they're in part of an enmeshed family, because of course, you don't know what's normal and what's not until you really go into family therapy. And someone's like, so that's enmeshment. That's super unhealthy. You're in a parentification, you're in a parent role, and you're the child, that's enmeshment. So back to the triangle, if you're in a parent-child relationship and you're the child and you're in the parentification role, super enmeshed, way too involved. So there's blurred boundaries, unhealthy family patterns, control, social problems, dysfunction in those patterns. lack of independence and individuality. They don't have you don't have your own identity. When you're here, your identity is so enmeshed with your children or with whoever it is with. And it's supposed to be here. So you have your own identity. So deeply ingrained, lack of space, time, fear of conflict, shame, anxiety. So you're punished if you put up a boundary, if you don't show up to family dinner, and then you're punished for that. Then there's conflict. So you just stay passive and you just say yes when you really may know. That's passive, but really it's a little passive aggressive. So you have an unclear identity, like I said, your self-esteem, substance abuse, physical health, unstable relationships, unhealthy modeling for your kids and other people, and health and mental health disorders. That's what happens when we're enmeshed. And this is what happens to you. Okay? When we don't have boundaries, when we're in the drama triangle, emotionally affected, completely shut down, for example, you avoid because of the fear. You're exhausted. That's what I see the most is people are just extremely exhausted. It's exhausting to be in a relationship where your own identity is like smashed and trapped according to this person that holds the power. And then you feel worthless. And then it becomes a syndrome. That's the real bad and meshed toxic syndrome. And then you lose your values. And then your self-worth goes. And then you're burned out. And there's lots of, I have lots of workshops on that for kids and parenting. There's about 40, 50 parenting ones on there about all this too, and how, how to get out of the syndrome. You become codependent to the syndrome. And I'll go over a book in the back about that. Okay, so let's do a little check-in. Halfway through here, let's check in. I always do a scale, 1 to 10, right? So 10 being the strongest. So if you feel, always put a number to some of your feelings or the emotion, okay? Always put a number to it. So you can say, well, I was at a 5, or I was at a 10, or I was at a 2. So it wasn't that strong, but it was there. So how often do you feel angry? So if you feel pretty often angry most days, that's like an 8. And most of the day. Just check in with yourself. How often do I worry about the other people and what they think of me? That happens a lot. And then the guilt. How much guilt, 1 to 10, do I have on wanting things for myself? I've had lots of clients, I'm not going to, female or male, but it's guilt of scheduling their self-care, their self-soothing time. And they feel guilty because the dishes aren't done, because they can't go and do their self-care that has been scheduled, or I call it their reward system. And I have people work on their reward system, and they have a reward system and they feel guilty about doing the reward system. So they don't put boundaries up and say, you know what, I'm leaving, I'm going to do this. This was scheduled. Everyone else is going to have to take care of it. And the guilt just overtakes the reward system, and it hijacks the brain, hijacks the body. And then they don't do it. And then we have more guilt, and then it's just a big cycle, right? So when is the last time you said no to someone? When did I last say yes to something I secretly didn't want to do? That's that I say yes and I really mean no, and that's that passive aggressive. Just go through these. What are the 10 things I most like to do with my time? And are you doing it? That's your values, time, energy, money. We're going to go over in a minute. So what are you doing with your time? Do you let people violate your time, energy, or money? So can you come up with those things? 10 things that I hate doing. I have, I love my little list of that. And I was listening to a TED Talk or something. It's like, learn to love the things you hate. And hate's a strong word, but I use it in my anxiety program of like, what do you hate? I'm like, I really hate this, and it's a strong word, but okay. But can you learn how to love what you hate and still have strong feelings about things, but not be afraid? I hate when someone yells at me, for example. Okay, that's not me, but just in general, right? It's like, well, of course I hate when somebody yells at me. That's not acceptable. But so it's like, and so what is the boundary around people that yell at you or that raise their voice? Is it acceptable? I mean, so look at those. And what am I afraid of? And what calms you inside? What are you afraid of and what calms you? So love, fear. Those are the only two things. And it's like it stems from love or fear. So if you feel like people are taking advantage of you in some way, then that is fear, right? Not love. So here's your values. Is to remind you time, energy, and money. Where do they go? That's why I do lots of time management workshop. I teach a lot of time, how to take care of your time, because time is number one. Because then that leads to your energy, and then that leads to your money. So you're going to nurture your money, or you're going to, the opposite, right? You're going to nurture your time. You're going to nurture your energy, your soul. Energy to me is your soul. It's your mind and body and your spirit, but your soul is deep. That's different. Where do you give out? Where do you give that? Do you give it away freely? Or do you do it in a higher purpose and you serve? That's not giving away anything. That's serving someone and being kind. Okay, so let's get to the how do you do it now? Here's, we got to get to all that. So I know you were waiting for all that, right? So begin setting your personal boundaries. It's like, okay, personal is you, and that was that list right before is your value system. You have to have clear expectations with yourself first. I have to feel this way. I need this, and I'm willing to do this. For other people or myself, I'm willing to do. And then of course, later, the next one I talk about, I'm willing to not do. So it's really fine. It's actually easier to be like, I'm really not okay with that. And you can make that list. Super important to make that list. I am not ever going to do these deal breakers. It's unacceptable for my child to do this, or this. And what is the natural consequences come? Because the consequence won't. Yeah. But a natural consequence could. So purpose, your higher purpose of connected to your values. So here's your higher purpose. Here's all your values in the middle. And then what are you going to gain from that setting that personal boundary? Okay. That's a whole, I could talk an hour on each one of these slides. There's so much. I love higher purpose stuff. It connects you to your soul and it says, here's my higher purpose. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week. Let's just say exercise, gym rat fan. Just exercise, just move 10 minutes a day scientifically, completely can change your whole inside and outside. But you say you're going to move, exercise 30 minutes 3 times a week, and you haven't done this before. What's your higher purpose? Here's your value system, what you think is going to happen, and what's one word in the gain down here. Write down your gain and don't allow anyone to take away your gain. And that's what, and it's a circle. And I have this, I write this out as a little handout as a assignment. What is your gain? Oh, I'm going to gain strength. I'm going to gain courage. I'm going to gain self-esteem. I'm going to gain health. So don't let anyone take away that gain. If you feel like it's getting ripped from you, then it's a lose. You're losing instead of gaining. So protect your deal breakers. Protect them. This is a deal breaker. No, this is not, going to happen. And the consequence will follow. And that's the hard part of all of this is like, what is the consequence for other people? It has nothing to do with other people. The consequence is on you. If you go back to that slide of what happens to you, you're trapped in very unhealthy mental health states, and unbalanced lifestyle is what happens to you. So don't worry about the consequences for other people. Worry about the consequences for you. You don't sleep, right? You have anxiety. It turns to deep depression when people are violating your boundaries. And then repeat if needed. We're going to talk all about that. Okay, so here's what we have to know, okay, about assertive. So now we're moving to assertive behavior. How do we, now we know all about boundaries and why we should do them and all of our value systems and all that stuff. And that's all great. A lot of people can get there, but they don't get to this point. So we have to understand the types of behavior that is associated with fear, which is actually associated with anger, okay? So aggressive, passive, aggressive, and passive are all anger definitions. That those all come from anger, which is the fear. It all comes from fear. It doesn't come from love. We don't disrespect people when we're in love, you know, do we? Oh, we do all the time. We bully the most in our own homes, and it's been excessive in the last year and a half. And then passive aggressive. Oh, I say yes, but I really mean no. And that passive is everyone's right and I'm wrong. And that one scares me the most because if you stay in that for a long period of time, you will volcano because stuffers will volcano. You stuff. There's lots of books on that. One that I really like is No More Mr. Nice Guy. It's not, doesn't mean they have to be, you don't have to be nice. Kind, I'd rather have, but No More Mr. Nice Guy talks about some passive behavior of like, how do I get what I want? Right? And this book also. I have No More Mr. Nice Guy in my home office, but I have several copies of this. So how do you do that? By having a crucial conversation, by being direct with respect. And remember, I think that this is listed like 3 places. I feel the only thing you ever need to do is 3 sentences. I feel, I need, and I'm willing to do. It's not that you need to stop yelling at me. It's, I feel disrespected when you're yelling at me. I need you to stop, and I'm willing to talk to you after lunch. End of story. That's it. So clues that you know that you're in this cycle of thought, feeling, and behavior, because that's how our brain works, is if you're in a thinking error, you have thoughts, go back to my thinking error workshop, part 1 and 2, very crucial. Emotional, go to my emotional intelligence 1 and 2, so you can see what your emotions are doing. And then your behavior, your physiological reaction is your body. That's your physical body that's going to react. And then your behavior. So you know that you're in the cycle if you're having a thinking error, if you're emotionally distraught and dangerously out of control with your emotions, and you're having a physical reaction, a physiological reaction, then you know that your behavior is going to be aggressive, passive aggressive, or passive. It's very simple. If you have those going on, you will not be assertive. It doesn't happen because you're in your back of your midbrain where we don't reason and self-talk and anything. We're just in survival. So you have the ability to understand where you are in the brain and stop and say, you know what, I'm gonna have to get back to you on that. This is not okay with me, but I'm gonna have to get back to you on that because you can't think clear. You can't say, I feel disrespected. I need this and I'm willing to do that. You cannot be in the assertive brain when you're in the back of the brain, in the midbrain with fight, flight, or freeze. That's your survival brain. So this is so crucial. You cannot be assertive unless you're up here. And that's a whole other workshop, right? Of like how to get there. And I talk a ton about that, about your thinking error class, like how, to get rid of some of those things so you can be assertive. But you'll never say those things. You'll never go, most likely because you're not self-talking. Oh, wait, what do I need right now? I need a break from this person. And you're self-talking. Oh, wait, I feel really activated. My body is breathing heavy. I'm sweating. I feel completely violated. I've been with a client a long time ago in the court system, another job I used to, and it's like, wow, I felt completely violent, so I start shaking. So when you start shaking and you get to a physiological reaction, then you are not in your frontal lobes. So that's really hard to pull yourself back, but it's possible. It usually just takes about 10 minutes. And you have to do some mindfulness, some breathing, some room scan, bringing you back to the present instead of your survival brain to be able to be assertive. So this is the problem, is we don't stay out of our survival brain long enough to be assertive. But we have to take a break and do all those things so we can come back to it. So back to this, how do we be assertive now? I feel I need, I'm willing to do, oh wait, I'm not willing to do this. That's a 0. That is just, that line in the sand. Make sure you know what that is, especially in relationships. How many times do we let that fall over the line, right? Someone crosses our fence, someone crosses our line over and over and over again. And then you finally say, you know what, I'm not willing to do this blank anymore. And you know what, I just don't agree. I feel ignored. I feel hurt. I feel, so that's just some things that you have to say to a point. It's not about the other person. Remember, I mean, if they violate it after you put up the boundary, is what we're going to talk about next. But first we have to know all these tools, crucial conversations. Like I said, we went through, this was our main textbook for mediation, to go through the mediation program. And so it's just really, it talks about dialogue, it talks about safety. The problem is, remember, if you're in fear brain, unsafe, you don't do this stuff. So you got to make it safe. If it's not safe, you stop. You have to master your story. So meaning you'll get rid of your thinking error story. That's why I love thinking error so much. You have to state your path. What are the facts? You have to understand the facts, that not thinking errors. Thinking errors are not facts. So explore how to move to action now. So you have to go into action, and that's what assertive directed with respect is. And so rinse and repeat. So let's, get your questions ready and some comments if you need to, and chat them, and we'll go through them a little bit. Because the biggest question is, how do I get rid of a toxic person in my life? I feel guilty. Do I get rid of them, or do I just keep them in my life because she's, a family member or my mother-in-law or my mother? It's like, and it's like, how do I have boundaries and repeat myself with people that are unresponsive, let's just call it that, are in the victim role, are toxic, are with a personality trait, that's what I'm going to call it, personality trait, that doesn't allow them to see someone else's perspective. It's also one of the jerk qualities in How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk. It's a book by Ben Erb. So it's when someone can't see my perspective, they're going to be a boundary violator every time. So if someone can't see my perspective, I have an opinion, I have something to say at a meeting, I have, you're in a team meeting, and of course your teenagers, I'm pretty sure they're never going to see my perspective. And it's awesome. And I just know that. And so, my youngest one's 18 and a half. So we're getting there. It's like, I am almost out of teenage life. But it's like, okay. And you didn't think I was that old, huh? But it's like, okay. So you're not going to see my perspective. But here's my limit. And if you're going to violate that limit, here's the natural consequence. And here's the reward when you do follow my boundaries or my limits. So once you identify that a person is a boundary violator, you got to have a game plan. And that's it. The game plan is for your energy, your time, and your money. And if you feel burned out by that person, you know how there's someone in your life that sucks you dry, that just sucks the life out of you. That's when you say, you know what, this phone call, in your self-talk, this phone call is not serving me well right now. I'm really disappointed that I even answered the phone, but I faced it and I answered the phone, and it was the same results. This person is vomiting on me or violating my time and they don't even ask like, hey, is this a good time? Or do you have time to talk? Or, and they have no questions to see your perspective. And then they just keep going. And you think, you know what, actually, I've got to go. This is not serving me right now. And they're like, what? Right? Everyone's had this happen, I'm sure. And then they're like blaming you for that. And then it's like, wait, I can't see your perspective. What do you mean you have to go? You just for me. You didn't do for me. I need to talk to you about this. Okay, well, I can talk to you about this, but I'm willing to talk to you about this tomorrow. And so then you set a time. And if and so say they violate that again and say, what do you mean? What? You're being such a jerk. I can't believe you're being so selfish that you can't talk to me right now about this. And so they blame you for that. They gaslight you back. That's cool. And they manipulate you and they make you feel guilty or shameful. And so what you do right then again is you repeat it. I feel like I can't handle this conversation right now, whatever it is. I need you to call me back tomorrow at this time and I'll see what I can do. You have to just repeat it. That's all you can do. Tell me what else you could do. Not answer the phone? Well, this is someone that you have to answer the phone for some of the times. So yes, you can choose not to answer the phone. That's what I do with people all the time is like, okay, if it's not a good time, don't answer the phone. Text the person back or just say, hey, I got your message. I will be able to talk to you about this tomorrow or later or next week. It's not a good time for me. What do you mean it's not a good time for you? So it's zero empathy, zero validation. So watch yourself when you do that to other people. You get defensive when you're challenged. You try to convince someone to do something else. That's a boundary violator. You get dangerously emotionally out of control. You throw things, you scream, you fight, you punch the wall. That's domestic violence. That's dangerously emotionally defensive. So just watch this. So how you know what you're looking for now. You can totally identify the boundary violators. So give me a couple chats if you want and what's going on with some examples. Okay. And I won't say names and I don't, it's just like I just read them and just kind of answer them. So and you can't, no one else can. I'll just read this. Oz was very critical and will question every action that he doesn't see as correct. So he is my way or the highway kind of black and white thinker. That's thinking error number one. I can't see your perspective. So if someone thinks that they're correct, then they can't see someone else's perspective. Now that doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but you can't see someone else's perspective. You struggle with this often, you shut down because of it. Yes, that's called stonewalling, and that's passive. So you shut down because you feel unsafe. You're in fear brain of like, wow, I don't have an opinion. I don't have no one, I don't feel validated. You don't have a perspective. And so what would be a good way for me to set my boundaries? Well, it's very difficult when you're setting, just so you know, this is a personality trait that's very difficult when you're setting a boundary and they can't see your perspective. It's difficult because if they could see your perspective, they wouldn't violate your boundaries. But it's just saying, I feel really invisible when you tell me that, it's wrong and you're correct and that I don't have a voice. So that's why this scares me the most, is people that can't have a voice. This is your lymphatic system. And this is actually tied to inside of your body, your lymphatic system and your thyroid. Tell me how hormonal you are when you don't have a voice. It actually affects your thyroid and your lymphatic system that drains your toxins out of your body. It's very severe. You'll have physical reactions. And they're like, oh, why are you so hormonal? Well, it's because I don't have a voice. Actually, it's true. So if you're the one that's worried that you're the toxic one because you can't see other people's perspective, or if you're the one that is a boundary violator, you have a hard time with ex, you know, experiencing other people's boundaries because you feel violated, then just look at that. That's all you can do. You own that and you'd be like, wow, I'm a persecutor. I get really angry and I bully someone when they have a boundary. That is toxic. That is traumatic. And you will have lots of burned relationships, burned bridges, burned. And then you'll push and pull. Now, there's another part of that that I could go on forever on is the attachment styles. So when someone's nice to you and they want to attach, you won't trust that. So you'll push them away and you'll do everything bullying and rescuing, or, so an anxious attachment is rescuing and an avoidant attachment is bullying. So look at your attachment styles if you want to look that up. How does a child set boundaries with a controlling parent? Yeah, that one's really tough because you're supposed to be in the child role, right? And here's the controlling parent. It's the same way, but as you become an adult or a young teenager, you start realizing that as the parent gets more controlling, you'll just either rebel, you'll persecute, or just become passive. And that's where we learn how to be passive. We learn how to be passive with a controlling, abusive, authoritative parent instead of authoritarian. So when you have authoritative parent, you'd never know what to expect, and they're controlling. And so you either be passive aggressive, you'll lie about it, or you'll be passive. So you have to go back to assertive. You know what? I really feel violated when you yell at me, Dad, and I don't want to take it anymore. That's really hard to do, but you'll get there. So, and I set boundaries with my mother-in-law who tries to continue to enmesh into my family. Yes, I tell you, you're not the only one. This is very common. This is like textbook, right? So mother-in-law or mother into the relationship, and she wants to get clear in here because she has no identity of her own. That's it. And at what point does she go? The point she goes to my husband's ex-wife to find out, more about our plans. Oh. So this is good. So when we have a boundary violator, and they're not just a boundary violator, they're gaslit and manipulative. So they go around the triangle. They're not even in the triangle anymore. They go around the triangle and then put someone new into the triangle, like a neighbor, like a friend, like the ex-wife, like the kids. And they put them in the triangle. So you watch one, you're going to really see that. And you're going to be like, oh my heck, this person has put the kids into the triangle. So it says, how do you get out of the triangle? How do you stop the drama triangle? Well, you gotta just coach and challenge with boundaries. So you say, and that's number one is you and your husband on the same page. You are a family unit. She is not in your family unit ever. Because this is meshed. This is enmeshment. If she was in your family unit, she's married to you, and she's not. So you're married to your spouse, your partner, and you are here, and you set your boundaries like you have together, and then you continually repeat them continuously. It's very difficult because people don't get it, right? They keep doing it. So if they keep doing it, and they go around the bush, right? They go around the triangle and find someone else to suck you in, then that's where it says that is this is what you say, that is absolutely unacceptable that you went outside to another source and brought them into the triangle. So you talk to that other person one-on-one, not with, unless you need to have a little mediation with everybody in therapy. But here's the other person that's pulled into the triangle. You go talk to them and say, you know what? I don't condone you being in our triangle. It's not necessary. It's enmeshment. And I would appreciate that you had your own boundaries with her too, saying, hey, I don't want to get involved. How do I stay out of it? And now if the ex-wife or the person that's being put into the triangle or the kid feels nice that they're rescuing, then they've got their own, they'll stay in the triangle with that person because it's like they're collaborating, right? Against the other person. It's great. That's in boundaries 1. It talks about that third party, that third person, what happens when you bring someone in. Okay, so anything else? We're good on time. So YouTube channel to find the other webinars. I always try to see if I've gone over all these books. Here's all the Brene Brown ones, Boundaries with Cloud. Gottman's just a really good, talks about safety and boundaries all the time. Why We Don't Apologize by Lerner. And then there's Crucial Conversations. There's like 5 authors. So I never, Oh, the Human Magnet Syndrome is one of my favorites. It's about when we get really enmeshed into a codependent, violating, boundary, abusive relationships. It's like, why do we love people who hurt us? Why? Why do we do that? Yeah. How to avoid falling in love with a jerk. That's the jerk book I talked about, like how to recognize a boundary violator and a jerk. And here's the 3 jerk qualities. Divorce poison. If you have a lot of boundary issues with divorce, that's one of my all-time favorites just for that. There's only one book that needs to be done for that. In parenting and boundaries, it's Love and Logics and How to Raise an Emotionally Intelligent Child by Gottman. So very simple. I mean, I have like 3 books for the categories. There's thousands and thousands of parenting books, but you only need 1 or 2 for that. Okay. So, anything else?
Yeah, so we've got a couple questions. I know we're at 3 o'clock, so thanks for everybody that is here and joined us. I'll send this recording out later this week. So the first question I got was, do you feel it's ever healthy to cut out a toxic family member who has a diagnosed personality trait disorder, who is constantly in crisis and in a victim role?
Wow, that was worded awesome. Like I couldn't state anything better in my life. That was an awesome comment, by the way, because you have done your homework. That's all I know. And you have way, way high awareness. So we have a personality trait that's diagnosed. We have constant patterns of dysfunction, boundary violator, jerk qualities, and someone that is very toxic that's not going to heal. So all that tells me is that person is very, very hurt. Your mental health, great. Physical health, probably awful. All those things. It doesn't matter. That tells me that that person has been very, very hurt and is very traumatized and has very deep traumas themselves. And until that's treated, nothing will get better. So you have to decide what your value system is. If it's a family member and you want your children to be exposed to a very unhealthy, dangerously emotionally charged person, then do it. If not, have very, very, very good limits. It's this in a public place. It's Christmas, it's birthdays. But the minute that person violates the deal breaker of like violence, of aggression, of passive aggressive personality, borderline traits, a borderline will push and pull and push and pull, and it's very dysfunctional and very confusing. Then you decide if that person is worthy of your time, energy, and money. I don't care who they are. I don't care who they are. If your lifestyle is completely violated by this person, why have them? Why do we love the people that hurt us? We can stand over here at a distance and still love them at a distance. I actually have a quote that I was going to read about that. But yeah, what's the next one?
Okay, so the next one, how do you set boundaries with yourself when recovering from an enmeshed relationship so you don't go back to it?
Repeat. So what happens is our body stores that codependency, right? Of that syndrome. That's a syndrome. If you are yearning to go back to a person or a relationship that is hurt you, that is a violator. But that goes into codependency, and I don't have that quoted, and that's a whole other right. That's a whole other thing. But you can always go into Codependent No More book and the workbook a little bit, and that teaches you how to stay out of a toxic, damaging syndrome in a relationship. So if it's a romantic relationship, say, let's just hypothetically, it's a romantic, intimate relationship, and you're trying your hardest to stay out of the syndrome that that person keeps sucking you back into, and you don't want to go back, right? But you've come out of it, you've come back, you yo-yoed, and then you go. So how to stay out of that is that codependency workbook, how to know your own worth, because if you don't know your own worth, you will go back. And that's really tough. That's a little bit of work. That's some long-term therapy. That's a little bit of work for that.